easy. Body ain't breezy. And I hope you realize when you look into another person's eyes, you know today will be a very good day to have a good day. You know today will be a very good day to have a good day. With a little more love and a little more laughter, a little more good vibes, less disaster. You know today will be a very good day to have a good day. And I say, oh, hey. Just to have a good day. You know, today would be a very good day just to have a good day. With a little more love and a little more laughter, a little more good vibes, less disaster. You know, today would be a very good day just to have a good day. Oh, baby. Very good day. Oh, good day. Oh, good day. You know that. Oh, good day. Yeah. Oh, good day. Got this. Oh, good day.
Hey. How are you? How are you? Wait a minute. I think you're on mute because I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. How you doing?
Huh?
You got me?
I got you. It's low. Maybe it's my computer. Okay. Keep talking.
I am talking. I am talking.
Yes, and it's coming in loud and clearly. So I'm just doing some background music because this is my music that's on the playlist right now. So I'm just got a few things going on. How are you doing today?
Doing okay. Got a big outdoor festival up here I'm playing this afternoon. So I wasn't supposed to play, but then there was a cancellation and I found out yesterday. So I was supposed to be presenting, a co-presenter on this event, and now I'm working. So I had to learn the music and write charts for the gig yesterday and last night.
Oh, wow.
But
wow.
Hey, these are the things that the craft demands, right?
So. Craft demands, yeah. So let me, because it's 12 o'clock. I don't know who's going to join, if anyone's going to join, or if it's just going to be us. We're going to have just a conversation about music, Black music in particular. So let me do an official welcome and an introduction to you, and then we can continue this conversation because, I have questions. Now I have questions. All right, so hey, everybody, it's Tonyabrewington. Welcome to the June edition of the Courageous Conversations Fireside Chat. I have my very special guest, Mr. Mike Griot. And let me tell you, I've known Mike for a long time. He's a phenomenal musician. He's a solid bass player. He's been in several bands that are his bands. He's kind of formed these bands. He's been a touring musician. He's a music curator at a performing arts center where he lives, in the area where he lives. He's also the producer, a music producer of blues festivals, not jazz festivals, but festivals, music festivals in the Northeast area. So he's done a lot of things. He's a great musician, great person. And I just want to introduce you to Mr. Mike Griot, AKA Mike Griot.
Wow. When you hear people talk about you, even I get bored. I'm like, okay, let's get to the point. Yeah, this guy's town, whatever.
Whatever. But, I have to do it officially because there are people who say, Tonya, can I listen? I couldn't make it. Can I listen? And I want them to know who you are because, people who know you, and we know that you're a great musician, but, for people who don't know you, they're like, well, who's this guy? And, so hold on, let me record before I am recording. Okay, great. So yeah, they're like, who's this guy? And I just want to make sure, people recognize we're dealing with someone who knows his business, knows his craft, and is good at what he does. So
we're still working on it. Still working
on it. Yeah, but that's normal. And I think that's for anyone who's part of this. If you are really, really about your business, you're going to continue to work on your craft no matter what, right? So it's
Yeah.
just what happens. It's just what happens. So Mike, let's talk about, you said you're now you have to play. You were going to what, produce in an event today, and now you're one of the musicians.
Right. I have to cover a cancellation of another bass player who I hired to do this particular, but he had a schedule conflict. So the young lady who's singing is actually one of the people I work with all the time. And the event is I guess you could call it a cover music festival. So the town where I live, South Orange, New Jersey, incidentally, every year they basically have this sort of community festival, and it's all day cover bands. Now, for those of you who don't know what a cover band is it's a band that plays other people's music, usually famous. So people enjoy cover bands because it's like a jukebox or a sing-along, right?
Yeah.
This particular day, they have 9 cover bands, 9 different artists. I think there's Tom Petty, Earth, Wind and Fire, Shaka Khan, the Beatles, and then the group that I'm with, we're covering Rihanna.
Oh, wow.
So we're playing all Rihanna songs for like half an hour today, and probably in front of about 2,000 people.
Right. That sounds interesting though. But I think what's even more interesting is that you just got this and you're like, all right, I've just got to learn the music. And
Man, I was up last night writing charts and making a little book so it'd be neat, and so I could basically just kind of perform and read the book at the same time, which is basically the way most professionals do it.
Right. So how long have you been playing music?
Oh, wow. I would say, wow, 52 years.
52 years. Oh my God. Are you okay? You're gonna hit a magic number this year?
I already I did. I mean, I'm 60 now. Yeah.
Okay.
So I've been playing since I was 8.
Yeah. Awesome. That's awesome. So let me tell you, and what's interesting, let me put this in before I jump into Black Music Month. When I've heard you play live, it's one of the most interesting things to hear you play live. I think I shared this with you one time, that I went to a festival, there were other musicians playing, you could hear other bass players, they were just like, you didn't really hear them, right? You don't hear them. And then I went to the bathroom and I heard this bass and it was like, woo. I was like, that is Mike. I know that's Mike. And it was you.
Hold on. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to know that she just said she heard me from the bathroom. So I'm not sure what that actually
No. It's like, because when I was in there, I heard everybody else, but it wasn't a distinctive sound. Let me put it that way. It just wasn't a distinctive sound. So I get there and I'm listening and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is Mike. I know that's Mike because I've heard you play before. So I just think that's interesting. All right. All that being said, the reason I wanted to do this this conversation in particular, I do like with the Courageous Conversations, we talk about things that are challenging, difficult, that people don't always talk about. But I also think we also need to talk about things that are fun and engaging. And to me, there's nothing more engaging and fun than music. It's been like the soundtrack for my life. And of course, if you're a musician, it's been that way for you too. And I'm not a musician, but I consider myself a designer. I do some other things, but still, even for a lot of people, it's the soundtrack to their lives. So when I think about the fact that June is the celebration of Black Music Month, African American Music Month, however you want to look at it, I think about how this music has carried and gone everywhere throughout the world. And people respond, people are engaged in this particular genre, this music that people created in this culture, Black culture, which kind of started to me in the depths of despair when you had enslaved people here, but then it's just kind of morphed and it's changed. And you now have this sound or this music that people worldwide are interested in, engaged in. They are taking, they bite on it, so to speak. People are actually picking it up and using it themselves. What do you think about the evolution of Black music in in the world?
Well, I mean, I believe there's so many places you could start this conversation. I'll pick one.
Mhm.
I think that obviously, you know, talking about the United States in the context of the United States,
Mhm.
like most things African American, born out of the slave experience and born out of the diaspora. So, you know, music is an emotional art, and you can't remove it from the experience of the people who are going through it. So, quote unquote, Black music is really sort of like an Americanized term because it doesn't really speak to the origin story. And the origin story is far too complex to get into in this conversation. But what I will say is by the time our people, our ancestors wound up here, they already had thousands of years of music inside of them.
Right.
And once they got here and responded to the conditions and the emotional experience, the spiritual experience of being oppressed and colonized, one of the few things that the proverbial power structure could not take from them / us was our art, specifically our music, and then of course our worship experience.
Right. Right.
Also colonized as well.
Exactly.
So to go back to your original question, what is Black music? Well, depends on where you start the story. So let's go deeper.
So it's interesting you because I love what you're saying. I like what you just said. And what I find fascinating about it is it does start, it is an emotional experience, but I think we also, let me stop and let me rephrase this question. Is it the reason you think people respond to it so well? And I'm talking about the world over, because in many cases, we have actually infused our music with so much of the emotion of what we've gone through. To me, when you think about the history of, say, hip hop and rap, for where it started and why it started, it was really an expression, self-expression for a community that actually expanded out. And people were like, oh, this is kind of cool. The more you heard it, the more you understood it. And now you see that people the world over consider themselves hip hop artists or rap artists. Do you think the music, I mean, the emotionality, like the form of self-expression was the big thing there?
Of course, as a matter of fact, I would say that you could take allegedly disparate genres, let's say the blues and let's say hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
There are some parallels which speak to kind of an emotional birth. There are a lot of common traits between the blues and hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
Blues, like hip hop, was a safe place for us to express our Africanness on foreign instruments in a lot of cases. So we started to bring simple guitars and other sort of Western tools, if we were allowed to actually have them.
Mm-hmm.
And we started to kind of make our music. Hip hop was the same thing. It was the idea that we now have these tools, which were the early technologies of hip hop, drum machines, the ability to mix records together on turntables, and then the manifestation of the art form basically being birthed by the tools that were available at the time. So you had an emotional condition,
Mm-hmm.
a spiritual condition, and the available technology at the time all come together. And not only was it powerful in both of those genres, but it wound up getting everyone's attention because it couldn't be denied.
Right.
And that basically, those two origin stories are almost identical. in
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, exactly. So when you talk about tools, let me tell you what it reminds me of. You used to live in DC. I used to live in DC. And it reminds me of the young men you see on the street with the buckets turned upside down, and they are just, they're just creating, and it's a sound, and you're just like, you're like beating with the, you're doing this because they may not have any other tools, but they created something based on what they have.
That's right. And in DC in particular, and go-go,
Yeah,
you can't get more African and primal sounding than that.
exactly. And my understanding of go-go is that Chuck Brown is like, who's known as the godfather of go-go, basically. And it's because he had this bell. It was like a cowbell that he really used to kind of create this sound. But you see it embodied even in these young men who are on the street making this music with whatever they have available. That's what that looks like. So I think that's great. So, what do you think is the significance of the music itself?
Well, black music is so embedded in every other type of music. The slave experience gave birth to the blues. The blues is America's original music. It is the kissing cousin of the gospel experience, which was the Western colonization of the Christian colonization of our spirit.
Mm-hmm.
We took that to the church. We expressed ourselves at home and in the church spiritually on whatever instruments we could find. We then got access to Western European instruments much later, which created the ability to have a so-called jazz vernacular, because there were a lot of very literate Black musicians who were classically trained throughout the 1800s. So you've got us basically at the foundation of the musical house of America, and through the blues, and then the spinoff into jazz and then R&B. I always use the analogy that to talk about rock and roll, R&B, and jazz without talking about the blues is like having all the badass kids in the room fighting for space, and grandma is sitting in the corner and you're ignoring her. Right. And because grandma was responsible for all of this. Exactly. And grandma is still alive.
Grandma's still alive. When you talk about spirituals, and even through the evolution of spiritual music to what we know as gospel music, what we knew as gospel music, and even now to what as praise and worship, it's like gospel is still there, but it's like it's morphing throughout, spirituals. And then you had a Thomas Dorsey who had, the harmonizing with all the choirs and making sure the voices were in sync and harmonizing, which really transformed spirituals into gospel. And then you have even a Kirk Franklin nowadays, when he started his, the way he was presenting gospel music, and it's like a spinoff too. So it's like there's a morphing and there's an evolution even in that area. And I think you could probably take each of those genres and see the transformation. So when you're saying blues music, it's kind of like the root. Basically, it would be the root of the tree. And then you see all the branches, and you see the branches creating their own branches and their own trees. And so I see how that to me is a great analogy for what you were just talking about. So when you're thinking about something like, let me tell you what I'm going to say. The music, it's also the writing and the messaging that's in the music that I think is important. And one of the things that I find, or I have found is very interesting, is it sounds like poetry in a sense of what people have written. Because sometimes you're not sure, you didn't know what they were writing about. It depends on your age, of course. But then you come back later and you're like, they were talking about that? Because I didn't know that. I never saw it that way. And what I have to think about it now, at the age I am now, is that it was a form of poetry. You're writing about something, you're telling a story The people who get it, but the people who don't still enjoy it because it was
Well,
good.
yeah, musicians, well, most musicians would say musicians are in fact poets first on some level, because especially if you're a songwriter,
Mm-hmm.
because the genesis of any great song is basically the story. Story is most important, and what we do as musicians, it may sound cool to us and it may sound cool to other musicians, or we may recognize how gifted someone is on their instrument, but we're a minority. We are the less than 1% artisans of this thing. The only people that count are the audiences and the people who consume the art, people like yourself, because you require much less than what we generate. So, for example, I love being a songwriter because one of my writing partners in my band, our routine involves the first time we get together in the studio to write, there's never any instruments, and there's no equipment. We sit in the studio, but my style of writing with this particular project is, all right, let's talk about what's going on right now. Like, what did you see today, or what happened to you, or what happened to me? And we just have 2 tablets, old school, pen, and we just start riffing initially just on the story, the significance of the phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes a bit of prose later in the process, and then that becomes a song once we start to think about, okay, now what does this poem, what does this sonnet, in a sense, what kind of home do we need to build around it? So that's part of my process, is to make sure that the story is always first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It reminds me, because I'm listening a lot right now to like Michael Franti, and and a lot of what he talks about is it could be Michael Franti and Spearhead, or Michael Franti just in general. A lot of what he talks about is what's going on in the world right now, right here and right now. And so you're very clear about what his message is. And it sounds like he probably has a very similar process. He's like, what's going on in the world? Let's
Absolutely.
talk about it, and let's create, whatever we need to do around that. I know that one thing when I was growing up, Rick James was a phenomenal musician, but he was I guess a great songwriter too, because when he wrote the song about Mary Jane, I always thought he was talking about a woman. As a kid, I'm thinking he's talking about some woman he likes, right? And later on, came to find out it was about marijuana. And
Right.
it's like, to listen to it, there's no way I would have put the two things together and assumed that he's referencing what he was referencing. And even with, like, let's say the OJs who were talking, the song Brandy, you're thinking they're singing about some woman, this thing is gone off the rails, blah, blah, and it's their dog, so it's like, it's a way of presenting it so that it's enjoyable. You still enjoy the music, you get the idea, but it's not necessarily a very literal idea or translation of what they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the double meaning, the double entendre has been a vehicle that's been used since the beginning of songwriting.
Yeah, and it's if done properly, it's good. Hold on, just someone's at my door, believe it or not.
Hello?
Oh. Okay, I don't know who it is, so I'm gonna have to let it go. So, all right. The other thing is working music. What is it about the way Black music is set up and put together?
These questions are so macro. Good Lord.
let me tell you why I say that, because the idea, one thing I know is that it's very difficult for me to listen to music, some Black music, while I'm working, depending on what I'm doing. And it has a lot to do with the kind of work I might be doing, right? So if I'm doing like development work, like software development or whatever, I can't listen to R&B or anything else. I have to listen to something that's so, baseline. And I'm like, what is it about the music that we create that causes this kind of, you really can't listen to it in a certain way. It has to be done.
Well, a lot of it has to do with just movement. Our music makes us move. So, and we can't divorce our senses or divide our senses enough sometimes to have two different feelings sitting side by side. Like you may need a certain amount of serenity to do certain types of work.
Mm-hmm.
But if you got a Fela Kuti beat going in the background, it's impossible to freaking concentrate.
You can't do it.
You can't do it. Now, if you put on, Kind of Blue by Miles,
mm-hmm.
now all of a sudden you can get some work done.
You get some work done, right. So, I mean, that's an interesting thing. It's just an interesting take that our music is very different. And I'll tell you, my stepfather loved country music. And he said the reason he loved it is because it's just simple. He doesn't have to, I guess he doesn't have to think. He didn't have to think his way through,
Mm-hmm.
what was going on. It was just simple for him to actually look at it that way. So when I also think about the different genres of music that are considered American music, the truth is we are in every single genre that exists.
Pretty much without exception. I mean, and even genres as a culture that we haven't necessarily adopted as our own,
Mm-hmm.
the base is definitely from us. Because even, what's called the blues progression, which is a 1-4-5 in Roman numerals as we learn it intellectually, but that very familiar cadence is at the basis of almost every single music style that's been popular, with the exception, and this is sort of a backhanded compliment, with the exception of a couple of styles that were designed not to be that, but to work that hard not to be that means you're actually giving it even more credit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, during the New Wave era, there was a decided attempt to deviate from standard progressions, all of which, or most of which, come from African or blues related origins. So yeah, or that statement back in the old days, like Johnny hates jazz and all those euphemisms about jazz sucks. Well, a lot of that was basically saying that I don't like that form of Black music, so I have to do something else. And this actually happened. These were real things that were said during that time. Not to the point where the public would be like, oh, everybody hates jazz, but a lot of people, jazz just wasn't their thing because it came across as highly intellectual.
That jazz music was highly intellectual?
Highly intellectual.
That you had to really understand the music in order to appreciate it?
There was always that implication. I don't know how true that actually is, but I know that, jazz music is very advanced in its creation,
mm-hmm.
very intentional in its in how involved you have to be to actually do it well, and how learned and scholarly in some cases you need to be among like the great practitioners of the art form.
Mm-hmm.
But the question always remains, I mean, at the end of the day, it's art. And there's a lot of different art out here, and the people ultimately decide what's popular. It has nothing to do with guys like me. We just try to anticipate what the public likes.
How much would you say that someone like I'm saying the establishment, like radio stations and things, dictate what becomes popular?
Oh, hugely, like everything else in America. Institutions and money and profit centers are the music business is a business mostly because there was a need by somebody to monetize it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a fact of life.
Mm-hmm. So when you think about, let me put some names out there, and I want to talk about, especially, here we are, Tina Turner just passed away.
I
right?
know. Great Tina Turner.
Great Tina Turner. And I've had an opportunity to see her live, and she was just phenomenal. She's a phenomenal performer when she was in her heyday. And I saw an interview that she did, and she was like, someone said, well, would you ever go back to Vegas? And she's like, Vegas? I've already done Vegas. And she says in Europe, her music is more appreciated. It seemed like it was just more appreciated in Europe than it was here in the United States. And it makes me wonder, because there are other Black musicians, artists who go to Europe, and they're like, their music feels timeless. They can get a lot more traction without being here in the US than they can while they're here. What do you think influences that? And why is that so important? Why does that happen?
Money. The same reasons when my kids were young that I was touring heavily, mostly 90% overseas. Money, institutions, infrastructure, and mostly, and this is what most people who are American don't really realize, is that there's very little separation, or especially in Europe and through Africa, the need to compartmentalize music in order to sell it on some level is what has limited most Americans' ability to support a lot of different types of music. You know, venues closing, festivals closing down, radio stations going out of business, not existing, no centralized place to listen to music, streaming, basically allowing people to curate their own listening experience, devices allowing people to make choices except going to see live musicians do live concerts. These are all things which actually just are. We can't continue to complain about them. We can't opine about it. That is the 2023 that we live in. That being said, some things are being preserved deliberately because of that. Most of the people who care the most, unfortunately, not most of the people, but a good amount of people historically have not lived within the United States, that still believe that multi-generational, multi-genre festivals are important, culturally speaking, that musicians and artists of all kinds need healthcare and sort of a social system and possibly safety net to allow that part of the culture to actually continue to thrive in the people who do it. And so there's an accountability in that hemisphere, which looks at as art as necessary. Mm-hmm. And there is not that necessarily here, although there are people who attempt to do it in silos. It is not a national imperative by any means. And it really depends on where you place yourself inside of this sort of capitalistic, reality.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that is kind of based on, you see this also when you're talking about people devaluing arts in general? Because it's like in education, the only thing that seems to be important right now is STEM. They're just introducing STEAM, which includes the art component, but it's like the only focus right now is on what I would say, I'm hesitant to say hard science or hard things, but things are based more in like reality. It's not about creativity at that point. It's just about, can you do this? Yes or no? Is this here? Yes or no? But there's no sense of, let's see what happens if we can imagine something over here and see how we can get there. And we're going to play our way through it, or we're going to read our way or draw our way through it. So it's almost like that.
Yeah, I think that's true, except for the very real phenomenon, which is inside of a technology-based reality, which these kids are born into. That's their creative baseline. So, albeit different in digital, their sense of creativity is empowered by their perception of what technology does for them. in their lives. So they are driven. I'm the type of guy that always has believed, as an educator too, that there are no inferior generations.
Mm-hmm.
And so these kids, as a matter of fact, I believe the reverse. I think every generation gets smarter and smarter and smarter. So I think these kids coming up now, they are probably more creative than any generation before them. They just have the reality of doing it from a technologically driven baseline. And that is very, very different than some of our prior generations, including ours,
Mm-hmm.
where we're the generation of watching the big transition. We lived through the entire thing from analog to digital, in both society, in music, in technology, around the globe, and infrastructure. Yeah, we are literally we're first generation hip hop, walking digital divide, specimens, right?
Yeah.
These kids get creative when they're inspired by technology. They may have their own creativity, but they immediately go to the, how can I make this happen now? And they can do that a lot quicker than we could.
That's true. Very true. Very true.
Yep. Yep. They may not know what a bass guitar sounds like, which is what I play, but they are inspired by that sound the same way, and they have their own ideas about how to use it.
That's an interesting take on it. That's a different perspective, but that's good. That's good. Good to consider. So let me ask you, so talk about the future of Black music and where it is now, where you see it going, and how it stands the test of time. Let me tell you what I mean when I say that. My sister is over 20 years younger than me. And my sister prefers to listen to music that I listened to when I was growing up than she does to listen to the music that is out there right now in what I would consider in her generation, right? And so when I'm saying, where do you see this music? How do you see it actually changing, morphing? And what do you see? How do you see it standing, basically, like I'm saying, the test of time? Because for her to focus on the music that we listen to, or I'm listening to, and older, and not just on what she's growing up in, I just find that very fascinating, and just wonder what you're seeing around that.
Well, not to beat a dead horse, but I'll give you an example. So one of my daughters, who's about to turn 30, she in her playlist has almost every era of music that's ever existed. Now, in my generation, you had to dig for records, you had to listen to the radio, you had limited ability to find and harvest music, right?
Mm-hmm.
My daughter can spend an hour and have a longer playlist than I could have had in a year in an hour. So what that does, A, it says that Black music will always stand the test of time because it's at the basis of all music. B, it will always be perceived as through a technological lens, and we have to be able to tell our story and others tell our story so that we are not erased by the revisionist. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. End of the day, Black music is the test of time. It doesn't stand anything. It is the benchmark, and it's the pillar upon which all is built. But the stories that are told about it, depending on who's doing the telling, I think that it's impossible to talk about music without assuming the African DNA. You have to do it if you're being historically and intellectually honest about it.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. So, and then here's the flip side, Tonya. Then and this may be a little controversial, but it's just my opinion. There's also to talk about sort of like Black History Month and talk about Black Music Month, there's a sort of a subtle condescension I perceive about the idea that we're trying to codify something, for the purposes of talking about it as a month or as a day or as an awareness, that really is innocently insulted by the need to actually label it, because we are music, and it's just music. It's not actually not Black music at all. It's just music. And it was created by people of African descent. If the story eventually gets told correctly, there'll be no reason to call it Black music other than to say we have always sort of painted that tapestry, and others have, including us, have benefited from that. But Black music will never, ever disappear as long as Black people exist in the world.
Right. Exactly.
Never.
Which is good to know. I mean, it's like, I also think because it's a form of expression, you can't get rid of expression. It's self-expression. You can't get rid of that.
Yeah.
So
and as long as we're alive, we'll continue to look at our surroundings and express ourselves in a way that's relevant to the time.
Right.
And that's really all it is. I do everything, and I spent a lot of time in the blues in the last 20 years, but a lot of that has to do with my own preservationist instincts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I created a blues festival after touring the world and basically reacting to what you were talking about, seeing how people in Europe and other places in the world revered the musicians, the music. They have the venues, they have the commitment to the art form, and it's multi-generational, and it's worth investing in. So that's why they do it. Full stop. There's no overly intellectual or critical conversation about the need for it or how it's changed and it ain't what it used to be. Sadly, a lot of that happens here in America. Just people who need to overanalyze something that is really requires very little analysis and just requires acknowledgement.
And so you chose blues because you wanted to preserve our role in blues.
I saw the revisionists stepping in, and I had witnessed the disparity in the touring experience between Europe and other places in the world and the States. And I played a lot of the major festivals in the world. And I basically said, first of all, okay, you've done all that, so you have some empirical evidence that it can work. Mm-hmm. And the place I lived was cute, like a lot of the places I visited. So I was like, okay, I got a cute environment. But then I also said, well, let me look at all the festival producers as a template. And I did my little searching. Then I said, okay, let me see how many Black blues festival producers there are. Crickets.
So you created a need. You filled a vacuum, basically.
Right. There it is.
Wow. So when people are looking at, what blues festivals are you creating? Are you creating?
So I spent from 2008 2007 when I started working on the project until it ended in the COVID era. Those 10 years or so, I had created the largest free blues festival in northern New Jersey. You can probably still visit it at southmountainblues.com if you're curious. But that festival literally, had tens of thousands of people over a decade. And yeah, I sort of, elicited the help of volunteers and some well-intentioned friends. I think I recall you dropping through. And yeah, it became bigger than the sum of its parts, including me. So that was a blessing. And then during COVID, I had a chance to co-create a major jazz and roots festival, which is now in its third year, called the Kane University Jazz and Roots Festival. It's Kean, looks like Keen, said like Kane. It's in Hillside/Union, New Jersey. It's on September 23rd. And you can basically Google Kane University Jazz and Roots Fest, and it'll come up. Last year, in the second year, I had a lot of great groups. I had Diane Reeves as the headliner. We did over 5,000 people in our second year. And this year, I do have a lineup which I can't announce yet, but it's going to be a massive artist again, like Diane Reeves, and we're targeting about 8,000 people this year.
It's in September?
September 23rd.
Okay. Okay.
And you can visit pwimedia.com just to kind of stay in touch or sign up or just see kind of what I'm doing.
So you're saying go to PW Media.
PWI.
I got you. Media.com. So Kane University, I'm only familiar with it because someone who went to high school with me a couple years behind me graduated from there. So
okay.
Oh, okay, I know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So as a blues musician, you're in a band. Do you guys have music out?
Yeah. The name of the band is called Blues People. Sort of loosely named after Amiri Baraka's quite famous book, Blues People. And we started during the pandemic, started writing and recording. This year we had 2 single releases in 23. Mm-hmm. First single is called The Skin I'm In. Mm-hmm. And our second single is called Troubled Times.
Okay.
They're both on Spotify, so you can look that up on Spotify. Yep. And they are very topical, and it's a lot of fun. The guy who's the fantastic lead singer and guitarist, Kelton, we grew up together in Orange, New Jersey, and we were in rival bands in high school. He was on the north side of town, I was on the south side of town, and we were the kids that had rehearsals in basements and garages and backyards and pushed our amps in shopping carts to our friends' houses and tried to rewire my dad's stereo and got punished for that one. But so Kelton and I have known each other most of our lives, and we're co-writing partners, and really proud of the work we're doing. Good.
Awesome. So I have a playlist, and The Skin I'm In is on that playlist. So if you listen to it. So yeah, it's on the playlist, and the link for the playlist is in the chat. Along with how to get in touch with you. So what else do you want to share as it relates to Black music? I know you got to get on because you got to get to your festival since you have to play.
I know. I have to go rehearse the material one more time before I leave the house. I think the only other thing I'll share is and this is relative to the position I've had with the Performing Arts Center I work with. It's called the South Orange Performing Arts Center. SOPAC is the acronym. But I'm very excited about that ongoing opportunity. I've been affiliated with that institution for about 13 years in different capacities. This year, with a new executive director, they gave me a bigger role, so I'm able to do more. And by what I mean by doing more is I can program more freely. And so look for, I'm really excited about the 23-24 season. And my activity you'll see jump up in the fourth quarter of this year, but I've got some famous African-American artists who have never played SOPAC in its history who are coming. And I'm really looking forward to doing a lot of that work because it allows me to actually insert what I think is valuable and important to us and to everyone in a real professional and funded environment. So that's good.
Okay, so that's where you'll be next.
Well, that's always on the radar. But if you go to, in terms of where I'll be in my gig and show and concert schedule, you can always go to pwimedia.com, and you'll see somewhere on there a green button that says upcoming shows. And usually it's under Blues People, because that's where I'm working the most. If not, just follow me on social media. A lot of my freelance gigs, I'm Mike Griot everywhere. And I still get hired to do a lot of different types of music outside of the ones I control. So yeah, I'm still a hired gun. So if you need a bass player, you better call me.
All right. Listen, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for doing like the retrospective on Black music, the historical implications, and kind of, where it stands, where it is right now, and how significant it has just been over the years. I just, I want to celebrate the fact that we're here. And the music has empowered us throughout the years. And that really is part of the whole messaging around Courageous Conversations and Courageously Alive. So thank you.
Thanks for taking the time. I know what a huge music fan you are. And you know better than most that I've dedicated my life to that muse, never regretted it a day. And I'm still as excited as I was when I was an 8-year-old. So it's a blessing to just wake up every day and still have fun. It's really it's a hard working life I've created, but it's on my own terms, and it's still a blast.
Good. Awesome. More of us, more people should be able to do the same kind of thing. So take ownership of your own life, because it's the only one you have. So anyway, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. And have so much fun at the festival you're going to.
All right. See you guys.
All right. Take care. Bye, Mike.